Final ending of the extra effort, part 1 down below. By the time Marilee turned 18, she had realized that her mother and Aunt Annie shared a deeper bond than just being sisters-in-law. She had inadvertently witnessed their close moments together more than once, understanding their affection for each other. Marilee often pondered, though never voiced, whether her mother ever thought about her father. Marilee's only luxury, granted by Emily to Aunt Annie, was a subscription to the local newspaper, dismissively called a rag by her mother. Despite her mother's complaints about the newsprint leaving black ink on their hands, Marilee enjoyed reading it. In those pages, she found stories about the wild frontiers, which captivated her imagination. She yearned for the fresh pine scents and the wildlife sounds described, a stark contrast to the unpleasant smells of the bayou and the noise of New Orleans where she lived. One day, Marilee stumbled upon the personal ads section in the newspaper. She was intrigued by the various men seeking companionship, each trying to charm through their words. Among these, she was drawn to an advertisement by William J. from the Colorado Territory, who seemed to be speaking directly to her. Excitedly, Marilee shared the news with her mother and Aunt Annie, but their reaction was lukewarm. However, they agreed to let her correspond with the young man. Now, standing on the train platform, Marilee was about to embark on a journey to Benhurst to meet her betrothed. Engaged in conversation in French with her mother and Aunt Annie, she was interrupted when the conductor announced boarding. A kind young man offered to help with her luggage, but before she could accept, another man interjected and insisted the young man assist her, even tipping him for the effort. Marilee was quite irritated by the intrusive behavior of some of the men on the train. She believed she was capable of handling the situation herself and expressed her frustration to the overbearing man who had intervened. She chose a window seat, eager to observe the landscape of the country as the train sped westward. However, her journey was interrupted by a series of unwelcome advances from several young men. The first spoke to her with flattering words, which she firmly rejected. The second and third were equally forward, with the third even daring to put his arm around her shoulders. Marilee was uncomfortable with these intrusions. Then, an older gentleman, noticing her discomfort, offered his help in French. Marilee was relieved when he presented himself as her father and dismissed the intrusive young man. She observed this man more closely. He was striking, with the early stages of a beard on his square jaw and light brown, almost golden eyes. His broad shoulders were clad in fine clothes, and his boots were immaculately polished. The gentleman took a seat across the aisle, respecting her space. They struck up a conversation, and Marilee learned that he was also traveling to Colorado, to Denver, and was a dentist by profession. His face bore a scar near his eye, which Marilee inquired about with a touch of her gloved finger. She was intrigued to learn that her new acquaintance, Dr. Jordanaire, had served in the military under the renowned General Daguerrepoint. Marilee's own father had served and died in the military under a respected Confederate general, though Dr. Jordanaire did not know him. In Lafayette, Louisiana, another young man made an unwelcome advance towards Marilee, boldly touching her thigh. Dr. Jordanaire quickly intervened, demonstrating a willingness to protect her, and had the young man removed by the conductor. Dr. Daniel Jordanaire then offered to sit next to her to deter any further unwanted attention. Marilee found herself comforted by his presence, noticing a masculine yet clean and warm scent emanating from him, which she found surprisingly appealing. As the train journey continued, with its rhythmic sounds and motions, Marilee found herself dozing off. She awoke to find her head resting against her guardian, Dr. Daniel Jordanaire, whom she affectionately called Pierre. Embarrassed, she sat up and smiled at him, feeling a sense of comfort and safety in his presence. Needing to use the facilities, she excused herself, referring to him as dear father. His deep, reassuring voice made her feel at ease. After freshening up, she returned to find him waiting for her, and they walked back to their seats, his arm providing steady support. In Dallas, Texas, Marilee realized how much she relied on Dr. Jordanaire. Hungry and feeling weak, she was grateful when he bought her a meat pie. He took care of their luggage as well, and Marilee felt a deep appreciation for his guidance and support. As they prepared to board the train to Denver, Marilee expressed her wish for him to continue with her to Benhurst. His warm smile and kind demeanor comforted her, and she felt a strong bond forming between them. Throughout the journey, Dr. Jordanaire maintained his protective role. In Denver, he organized their stagecoach ride to Benhurst, even telegraphing her fiancé, William Jacob Benhurst III, about their arrival. At a stop, Marilee noticed Daniel's growing whiskers and requested him to keep a mustache, reminiscent of her late father, which he agreed to do for her. Arriving at the hotel in Benhurst, Daniel ensured that Marilee had everything she needed for a comfortable stay, including arranging for a bath. Marilee took care to secure her privacy in her room, covering the keyhole with a cloth for extra security. With a basin of water, soap, and fresh linen provided, she was grateful to finally have the chance to bathe and change out of the clothes she had been wearing for days. Her gratitude towards Daniel for his kindness and care was immense. Marilee eagerly stepped into the hot bath, feeling a wave of relief as the warm water surrounded her. She took a moment to relax, letting the heat soothe her tired body. After a while, she began to wash herself. She used the soap to clean every part of her body, feeling refreshed as she scrubbed away the grime of her journey. The soap was a bit harsh, and her skin turned slightly red from the vigorous cleaning, but the warmth of the water was comforting. Once she finished bathing, Marilee stood up and dried off with a large flannel sheet. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. At 5 feet 3 inches, she noticed her well-proportioned figure. Her full breasts and slightly rounded belly spoke of her good upbringing and healthy physique. Her hips and legs were strong, hinting at her potential for motherhood. She smiled at her reflection, noting her lush brunette hair, regal nose and cheeks, pale blue eyes, and full lips. Marilee felt confident that William Jacob Benhurst III would be pleased with her as his bride. As she lay down on the bed, the motion of the train still seemed to linger with her, but she soon drifted off to sleep. The stagecoach journey to her final destination was quite challenging. The road was bumpy and rocky, making for a rough ride. She was grateful for Dr. Daniel Jordanair's presence. His humor and support made the difficult journey more bearable. His joke about the Rocky Mountains brought a much-needed laugh as the carriage shook on the uneven terrain. Marilee felt a deep sense of gratitude towards him for all his help and company throughout their travels. Marilee was invited to sit next to Daniel during the stagecoach ride. She held onto a leather strap with one hand and wrapped her other arm around his lean waist for stability. His strong arm around her waist made the discomforts of the journey fade away. At some point, Marilee dozed off, finding herself leaning closely against him. Waking up, she was enveloped in his scent and smiled up into his kind eyes. Jokingly, she remarked on how comfortable he was as a pillow. Daniel responded with a smile, saying he would miss the sound of her breathing close to him. This exchange brought a warm feeling to Marilee. Upon their arrival in Benhurst, Daniel stepped out first and offered his hand to help her down. When she saw William Jacob Benhurst III waiting for them, she couldn't help but feel a slight disappointment. William was shorter and more stout than she had imagined, with his hair slicked down and his clothes a bit too tight for his frame. His boots were noticeably dirty. As she stepped out, Marilee missed the rung and almost fell, but Daniel's quick reflexes saved her. In the process, his hand accidentally brushed against her, causing her to feel a sudden jolt of surprise. Once on solid ground, Daniel introduced her to both Billy and Will. The two men seemed more interested in the fact that Daniel was a doctor than in Marilee herself. However, Daniel kindly brought her back into the conversation by mentioning that it was Marilee who had convinced him to come to Benhurst. Billy then took Marilee on a tour of the town. They passed by a taxidermist's shop, which made Marilee reflect on the practice of hunting. While she understood its necessity for providing food and controlling animal population, the idea of keeping animal parts as trophies seemed strange to her. As Marilee and Billy continued their tour of the town, they came across a shop playing unusual music. Billy shared with her that the shop offered baths with Oriental women who would join their customers for a bath and a scrub for $2. Billy also pointed out the saloons in the area, explaining that many of them featured women who danced for the male patrons. He mentioned that these women often provided private entertainment in their chambers for a fee. Marilee noted Billy's extensive knowledge of such matters, which seemed to embarrass him. Their tour led them to a building that Will had recommended to Dr. Jordanair. Marilee was pleased when Daniel announced that she would stay with him until her marriage to Billy. Billy, seemingly overenthusiastic, suggested they get married that very night, which made Marilee giggle. They celebrated the occasion with a dinner of buffalo meat and potatoes at a nice restaurant. Marilee quickly adapted to her new roles as a dental assistant and office manager for Dr. Jordanair. She took great care in welcoming patients, managing their records, and ensuring their comfort. However, she found Billy's constant presence a bit overwhelming and hoped that his excitement would settle down after their marriage. Interestingly, many of Dr. Jordanair's patients made awkward attempts to flirt with Marilee. Dr. Jordanair disapproved of this behavior and even reprimanded the more forward men. However, Billy seemed to take pride in these comments when he was around, much to Marilee's dismay. Dr. Jordanair had a beautiful gown made for Marilee, costing $12. Though she thought the price steep, he insisted it was worth it. She offered to repay him, but he assured her that her help with his patients and her input in the design and construction of his home, which he named Crescent City in memory of their original home, was more than enough repayment. In Dr. Daniel Jordanair's home, Marilee had her own bedroom, located just across the hall from his. Beulah, the housekeeper, recognized Marilee as the lady of the house and followed her instructions. This life was as close to perfect as Marilee had ever experienced. She fondly remembered her father, Anatole Burgess, who had adored her as his little princess and always made her laugh. Sadly, the Civil War had taken her father from her, leaving her longing for the presence of such a wonderful and courageous man. Now, in her new life, Peer Daniel Jordanair showered her with similar affection and spared no expense to fulfill her desires. The day of her wedding arrived, and Marilee left Crescent City in a beautifully prepared Benhurst buggy, adorned with fresh varnish and white ribbons, as were the horses. As she was about to depart, Peer, trying to maintain a jovial mood, remarked on her carriage awaiting. Despite his efforts to joke, Marilee noticed the tears in his eyes. He dismissed Billy's stable boy, Caesar Washington, and personally helped Marilee into the buggy. He then attached his horse to the back and joined her for the ride to Redemption Baptist Church. As they made their way, well-wishers lined the streets to see them pass. The playful banter of the onlookers and peers' responses added a light-hearted touch to the procession. Upon reaching the church, the dressmaker and her daughters helped merrily change into her wedding attire. This involved a series of layers including a corset, shifts, a petticoat, a hoop, and a bustle, all topped by her elegant ivory silk gown. Once ready, one of the dressmaker's daughters went to inform the Reverend, leaving Merrily alone with her thoughts. She reflected on her journey and the crucial role Pierre had played in it. As she pondered, the door opened, and Pierre entered the room. Merrily looked at the distinguished gentleman before her, trying to muster a smile amidst the whirlwind of emotions she was experiencing. "Dear Pierre, am I making the right choice?" Merrily asked Daniel, seeking reassurance and guidance on her wedding day. Daniel smiled gently and shared that many brides have felt similar uncertainties, recalling how his own wife had expressed the same doubts to her father. Curious, Merrily inquired about his wife, to which Daniel responded curtly that she wasn't relevant to the current moment, indicating a deeper, unspoken pain. Looking into Daniel's eyes, Merrily sensed the profound sadness and hurt buried within him. She stood up, reached out, and tenderly touched his face, expressing her wish never to cause him sorrow. Daniel, attempting to lighten the mood, playfully remarked that she had already caused him pain by pledging herself to another. Merrily responded with a smile, and in a spontaneous moment, she stood on her toes and gently kissed Daniel, feeling a surge of emotion. She then pushed aside any lingering doubts and, picking up her bouquet, took Daniel's arm to proceed with the ceremony. During the wedding, Daniel was visibly emotional, crying openly as Merrily and Billy were pronounced husband and wife. Merrily, too, shed tears, noticing Billy's smug satisfaction and the discomfort it seemed to cause Daniel. As the newlyweds left the church, Merrily glanced back at Daniel, acknowledging their special bond one last time before being led away by her husband to their wedding reception at Aliner's. The moment was bittersweet, marking both a beginning and an end. After a lavish meal filled with numerous toasts wishing them happiness and health, and a few humorous jokes, Merrily's husband led her back to their carriage. Caesar Washington, the stable boy, took the reins, and they headed towards the Benhurst ranch. Merrily was disappointed to discover that they would be living with Billy's parents, not in their own house. This news had come as a surprise during the rehearsal dinner at the Benhurst ranch. Billy and his father had assured her that they would have the entire third floor to themselves, promising privacy. When Merrily asked about having their own kitchen, Mrs. William J. Benhurst Jr., a stern and unwelcoming woman, informed her that meals would be prepared and eaten on the first floor. The expectation that Merrily would help in the kitchen and with other household chores was made clear by Norma Benhurst, who looked at her sharply, daring her to object. Feeling a bit overwhelmed and somewhat tipsy from the evening's festivities, Merrily leaned against Billy during the carriage ride. Despite her inebriated state, she couldn't help but hope that their stay at the Benhurst ranch would be temporary. Upon arriving at the ranch, Caesar helped Merrily out of the buggy, to which she slurred a thank you. Caesar was visibly surprised but pleased by her gratitude. In his experience, the Benhurst family rarely acknowledged the servants, often treating them as if they were invisible. Gratitude or kindness was uncommon from the family, making Merrily's simple act of thanking him quite notable. "Welcome, Mrs." Caesar responded, acknowledging her kind gesture. Caesar quickly concealed his smile when Billy, in his inebriated state, nearly fell out of the wagon. He offered to take care of the horses, but Billy insisted on carrying Merrily over the threshold himself. This attempt was clumsy and nearly resulted in an accident, as he almost dropped her and hit her head against the door frame. Merrily, upset and assertive, told Billy she would not allow him to carry her to their bedroom under these conditions. Her beautiful wedding dress, for which her dear Pierre had paid $12, was hastily and carelessly removed by Billy, who struggled with its numerous buttons and layers. Billy's impatient and unrefined manners continued as he stared at Merrily, making her uncomfortable. When he attempted to kiss her, she was taken aback by his approach, which he called French kissing, a method unfamiliar and disagreeable to her despite her French heritage. As Billy undressed, Merrily found his appearance quite unattractive, with his disproportionate physique and unappealing features. She refrained from commenting but couldn't hide her reaction completely. Reluctantly, Merrily lay on the bed, sinking into the soft mattress. Billy joined her, again embracing her, as she lay there, reflecting on the stark contrast between her expectations of marriage and the reality she was now facing. After an uncomfortable and distressing wedding night, Merrily was rudely awakened the next morning by Norma Benhurst, who demanded her help in preparing the morning meal. Merrily, still reeling from the previous night's events, was upset to learn that living with Billy's family meant she was expected to partake in household chores. Frustrated, Merrily reminded Norma of the promise that she and Billy would be undisturbed in their living arrangement. However, Norma insisted that this did not exempt Merrily from her duties in the household. When Norma refused to leave her room, insisting that privacy was unnecessary, Merrily firmly demanded her right to dress in peace. The confrontation ended with Norma reluctantly leaving the room. Observing the altercation, Billy remained passive, not defending his wife against his mother's intrusiveness. Merrily, fed up with the situation, expressed her intention to see if Pierre would allow them to use his apartment above the office, unwilling to tolerate Norma's overbearing behavior. Resignedly, Merrily dressed and joined Norma and Chloe, the house servant, in the kitchen, where she was met with a barrage of orders. This start to her married life was far from what she had envisioned, and she felt a growing desire for independence and respect within her new family. "Good morning, my dear, you are looking quite lovely this morning," Will greeted Merrily warmly as she joined the family for breakfast. "Thank you, sir," Merrily responded with politeness, despite feeling drained from her new responsibilities. Norma kept Merrily occupied all day, tasking her with washing and hanging the bedding from 4 beds. Once the laundry was done, it was time to prepare the noontime meal with Chloe. Later, after the bedsheets dried, Merrily and Dolly, another house servant, remade the beds. This was followed by preparations for the evening meal. By the time Merrily returned to her bedroom, she was utterly exhausted. Billy, however, seemed oblivious to her fatigue and initiated a brief and uncomfortable intimate encounter before quickly falling asleep. Merrily, still adjusting to her new marital life, managed to find some rest as well. Merrily's days became a repetitive cycle of endless chores, with little help from Billy, who spent his days away from the house. Frustrated with her mother-in-law's constant intrusions and lack of privacy, Merrily decided to take matters into her own hands. After enduring another night with Billy, Merrily waited for him to fall asleep before retrieving her sewing bag, a gift from Pierre. She took out some black thread and busied herself with a plan. Her actions led to a satisfying outcome the next morning. Norma, in her usual manner, barged into Merrily's bedroom without knocking and tripped over a black thread Merrily had strategically placed across the doorway. Sprawled on the floor, Norma was a mix of shock and anger. "I could have broken my neck," Norma exclaimed. "Perhaps if you'd knocked," Merrily retorted calmly. "It is quite rude to simply enter someone's bedchambers, you know." Norma, fuming, noticed the thin black thread that had caused her fall. The confrontation marked a turning point for Merrily, asserting her need for respect and privacy in the Benhurst household. "Would you look at that?" Merrily observed with a hint of mock surprise. "I think a spider has woven a web across the door." She watched as Norma approached the doorway, carefully stepping over the thin strands she had placed there. "Do be careful," Merrily warned with feigned concern. "Would hate to see you break your neck." Despite Merrily's efforts to assert some control, Norma continued to impose a heavy workload on her, expecting her to handle most of the household chores. Chloe and Dolly helped when they could, but Norma seemed intent on making sure Merrily bore the brunt of the work. Exhausted from the day's labor, Merrily served dinner to her father-in-law and Billy when they returned home. Later, as she and Billy prepared for bed, he boasted about his past encounters with dancing girls, much to Merrily's disgust. She challenged his pride in such behavior, questioning if he found it admirable to pay for intimate experiences. In their bed, Merrily provocatively questioned whether she would be the type of person men like Billy would have to pay for such encounters. Unfazed by her scorn, Billy again initiated a physical relationship with her. Merrily, unimpressed by his lack of skill despite his claimed experiences, made a cutting remark as he finished and prepared to sleep. The next morning, Norma approached their bedroom door with caution, mindful of the previous day's incident. Finding no thread this time, she confidently swung the door open, only to be startled as a cup of water Merrily had balanced on the doorframe tipped over, soaking her. The cup then fell, hitting Norma on the head. Merrily, dressing for the day, couldn't help but smile at her successful prank. "Dear mother-in-law, you really should knock," Merrily remarked as she exited her bedroom, passing by the fallen Norma without further comment. In the kitchen, Merrily and Chloe were busy making drop biscuits using lard. Chloe, although initially hesitant, agreed to let Merrily use a small amount of the lard later in the evening. Unbeknownst to Billy, Merrily had found a unique use for the lard, which explained her seeming receptiveness during their evening encounter. A small pad of lard was discreetly placed on a scrap of paper on her bedside table. The next morning was marked by another scream and a thump. Merrily dressed and found Norma sprawled on the floor outside her bedroom, having slipped on a patch of lard that Merrily had strategically placed. Merrily calmly stepped over the slippery spot and descended the stairs, ignoring Norma's dazed state. In the kitchen, Norma confronted Merrily, accusing her of reckless behavior. Merrily, clearly frustrated, retorted that she was only trying her best but was met with Norma's stubbornness. Chloe, trying to contain her amusement, focused on whisking eggs to avoid any trouble from Mrs. Benhurst. Merrily then announced her intention to ride into town, dismissing Norma's objections about unfinished chores. She asserted her independence, reminding Norma that she was a daughter-in-law, not a servant. Pierre had brought Merrily's horse, Missy, from Crescent City to the Benhurst ranch, and Caesar quickly prepared it for her. As Merrily left for town, Chloe and Dolly continued their work in the kitchen, enduring Norma's tirade. The atmosphere in the Benhurst household was tense, with Marilee's growing assertiveness clashing with Norma's domineering nature. "I hope Mrs. Marilee does something about her," Chloe whispered to Dolly, referring to Norma's overbearing behavior. "Amen to that," Dolly quietly agreed as they continued their work, scrubbing the sheets with harsh lye soap. Meanwhile, at his office, Dr. Jordanaire was attending to a patient. He could hear the chatter in the waiting area, which grew more animated with the arrival of a new visitor. He recognized the voice as belonging to a woman, which often stirred various reactions among his other patients. Finishing up with his current patient and recommending a whiskey rinse for dental issues, Dr. Jordanaire walked into the waiting room. He was greeted enthusiastically by Marilee, who embraced him warmly, expressing her happiness to see him. Earlier that day, Dr. Jordanaire had been helping Nguyen Mu, a woman seeking to travel to Paris, France. He had written letters to facilitate her journey, one to the station master in Denver and another to a steamboat company in New York City for her passage to Paris. Nguyen Mu, expressing her gratitude in a personal manner, had left Dr. Jordanaire reflecting on the transient nature of relationships in his life. As he helped her onto the stagecoach and loaded her luggage, he thought about the different women who had come and gone in his life, admonishing himself for lingering on thoughts of Marilee, who was also beyond his reach. He was reminded of his own situation, rooted in the small Colorado town, unable to leave despite having no strong ties to keep him there. Despite his attempts to stay detached, Dr. Jordanaire found his thoughts often returning to Marilee. Her charming smile, her laughter, and her kind nature. She brought a sense of joy and relief to his life, which otherwise felt barren and devoid of such warmth. In his office, Marilee greeted Daniel with affection, giving him quick, playful kisses that amused the men waiting outside. Her presence was a comforting and delightful contrast to the usual atmosphere of his practice. To Daniel, Marilee was a beacon of hope and happiness in his otherwise mundane life. Her presence was like a refreshing oasis, vitalizing his spirit. Similarly, Marilee felt an overwhelming sense of joy and contentment in Daniel's presence, her heart fluttering with affection for him. Once inside his private office, Daniel asked Marilee about her marriage. Her response, a dismissive scoff, hinted at her dissatisfaction. She candidly shared her frustrations with Daniel, speaking in French to ensure privacy. She expressed her unhappiness with the chores imposed by her mother-in-law and the unsatisfactory physical relationship with her husband, describing it in a blunt manner that left Daniel visibly embarrassed. Marilee noticed his discomfort and teased him playfully. Daniel pointed out the inappropriateness of their conversation, given their unmarried status, to which Marilee playfully responded by highlighting their respective marital experiences. Their conversation had to be cut short as Daniel had other patients to attend to. Marilee inquired about the possibility of moving into the upstairs apartment, a place of her own away from the challenges at the Benhurst home. Daniel assured her that the apartment was always hers, offering a sanctuary and a sign of his enduring care for her. Marilee stood up and gave Daniel a tender kiss, her arms wrapped around his neck. The brush of his mustache against her skin ignited a wave of emotion within her. She felt a surge of passion, starting from her lips and spreading through her body. Realizing the intensity of the moment, she stepped back, gazing at his flushed face. With a soft "Thank you, dear Pierre," she picked up her handbag and left his office, leaving Daniel slightly embarrassed and affected by their interaction. Upon leaving the office, Marilee headed to the Main Street saloon. Inside, she unexpectedly found Billy, her husband, in a compromising position with one of the women there. Instead of feeling anger, Marilee felt indifferent and simply left the saloon to enjoy a meal at Aliner's. Later, while preparing dinner with Chloe, Marilee was asked if she needed more lard, to which she responded affirmatively with a smile. The evening proceeded with Billy and Will planning to play cards, while Norma had a series of complaints to discuss about Marilee. Confronting her husband, Marilee informed Billy that she would not be staying at the Benhurst ranch. Despite his dismay at the thought of leaving the comfort and privileges of his home, Marilee assured him he didn't need to leave. She made it clear, however, that she would be moving to the apartment above her peer's office, emphasizing her decision firmly and asserting her independence in their relationship. Besides, Marilee said coolly, without a hint of a smile, "It's right across from the Main Street saloon, where you enjoy your noon meals." Billy was taken aback, stammering in confusion. Marilee confronted him about what she had seen at the saloon, her light blue eyes darkening with disapproval as she mentioned his inappropriate behavior with Marissa. The next morning, Norma approached Marilee's door with caution, checking for any surprises like the previous days. Finding no lard on the floor, no thread across the doorway, and the door properly shut, she thought Marilee might have learned her place in the household. Maybe, Norma considered, allowing Marilee to see her father more often would be beneficial. However, when she tried to open the door, she found the doorknob to be well greased and impossible to turn. Frustrated and enraged, Norma yelled and banged on the door, demanding entry. Downstairs, Will, Billy's father, sighed heavily, tired of the constant complaints from his wife about Marilee. He had been pleased with Billy's choice of a bride, seeing Marilee as intelligent, well-spoken, and of strong character. Now, amid the ongoing disputes and Norma's loud grievances, he started to doubt the choice, wondering if someone less assertive might have been better for their family. When the door finally opened, Marilee greeted Norma with a sweet smile, remarking on her newfound politeness in knocking. Norma, still irate, demanded that the greased doorknob be cleaned immediately, her frustration evident in her scowl. The dynamics in the Benhurst household were clearly strained, with Marilee's strong-willed nature clashing with the established norms of the family. Marilee, unfazed by Norma's orders, coolly advised her mother-in-law to take care of the greased doorknob herself as she walked away. Despite being burdened with numerous tasks by Norma throughout the day, Marilee faced her duties with a serene smile, much to Norma's annoyance. During the preparation of the evening meal, Chloe observed with surprise as Marilee discreetly added cayenne pepper to 3 of the biscuits, placing them specifically on Norma's plate. After the meal blessing, Marilee tried to prompt Billy to speak by nudging him, eventually resorting to a sharp kick under the table when he ignored her. As Norma experienced the unexpected heat from the spiced biscuits, Marilee maintained her composed demeanor. Frustrated with Billy's silence, she decided to take matters into her own hands. Addressing the family, Marilee announced her decision to return to the apartment above her peer's office. She made it clear that it was up to Billy to decide if he would join her. Her declaration took Will and Norma by surprise, prompting confused and indignant reactions from them. Will, caught off guard, tried to understand why Marilee would choose to leave, while Norma, visibly angry, insisted that Marilee could not just walk out. Marilee, standing her ground, firmly reiterated her intention to leave, asserting her independence and challenging the traditional dynamics of the Benhurst household. "You've really made my time here quite difficult," she confronted her mother-in-law. "I always knew you lacked the strength," Norma retorted with a sense of triumph. "I've had enough strength to keep from losing my temper with you, dear mother-in-law," Marilee countered sharply. "Don't push me further." Heading towards the staircase, Marilee announced her decision. "I'm going to pack now. Billy, I won't make you leave, just like you can't make me stay," she declared. "Billy should have chosen Polly," Will muttered under his breath. "Mom, Dad," Billy finally spoke up, standing firmly. Marilee barely listened as the voices of the Benhurst family escalated in the background. She focused on neatly packing her clothes into the elegant bags her father had gifted her. She deliberately set aside anything given by her husband or his parents, wanting no further obligations to them. To her surprise, Billy entered their room, his expression somber, and began to pack his things silently. They continued without a word until Marilee's closet was empty. "You should take the brush and comb," Billy finally said, pointing to them. Marilee glanced at the silver comb and brush her husband had given her on their wedding day, smiling faintly. "I thought I'd use them in the morning before packing them away," she said, not quite truthfully. "Oh," Billy simply replied. They lay down in their bed, the room dimly lit. "I was thinking about Marissa, Billy stammered, struggling to fabricate an excuse. "Billy, it doesn't matter to me," Marilee let out a deep sigh. She looked at him, his features seeming distorted in the dim light. "It really doesn't matter, and that's what bothers me the most," she said with another sigh. "You should care about this," he argued, but the conversation seemed to have reached its end. "Billy, remember, if you choose to be involved with those kinds of women, don't expect any warmth from me," Marilee cautioned him. The next morning, Marilee couldn't help but giggle. She hadn't set any traps, yet Norma was as nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Marilee observed her mother-in-law's careful movements from the door to the bed, which took an unusually long time. As Norma reached out to wake Marilee abruptly, Marilee reacted quickly. "Hi!" Marilee yelled, hitting her mother-in-law's face with a fluffy pillow. Norma's scream echoed throughout the house, causing Will downstairs to sigh deeply, anticipating the consequences of this latest skirmish. Marilee got dressed and followed her still irritated mother-in-law downstairs. Working efficiently with Chloe, they prepared breakfast while Norma voiced numerous complaints. "I'll really miss you, Mrs. Benhurst," Chloe shared quietly. "I'll miss you too," Marilee replied. "And I do feel bad about leaving you here." As Marilee served breakfast, she almost chuckled seeing Norma insist Billy switch plates with her. "Billy, have you brought our luggage down?" she inquired. No, I thought." Billy hesitated. "Billy, you usually have breakfast then rush to the office," Marilee noted calmly. Despite her calm demeanor, Billy sensed the anger in her voice. Marilee then calmly asked him to ensure the luggage was placed in the carriage before he left for work. It was a clear instruction, not a request, and Billy nodded in agreement. "Oh, you will not be using our carriage," Norma interjected. "Mr. Benhurst?" Marilee asked, turning to her father-in-law. "About the carriage?" Well, you see," Will stuttered, caught off guard. "Are you the mayor of Benhurst and yet so indecisive?" Marilee questioned, her voice laced with disapproval. "Now hold on," Will retorted. "It's all right," Marilee sighed. "I'll just take whatever my horse, Missy, can carry." "Missy? Who is that?" Norma asked, puzzled. "My horse, the mare my father gave me," Marilee explained. "You have no right to her." "Go ahead and use the carriage," Will interjected, glancing anxiously at his wife. "Thank you, sir," Marilee responded with gratitude. That evening, after a strained day at the office where father and son barely spoke, Billy almost headed towards the Benhurst ranch out of habit. He then remembered his new residence. Using the back stairs, he entered the apartment to find Marilee welcoming him warmly, even giving him a light kiss. She inquired about his day as she finished preparing their dinner. "Would you mind saying grace, dear husband?" Marilee requested. Billy recited a blessing and they began their meal. Afterwards, Billy attempted to teach Marilee how to play poker, starting with 5-card draw. To his surprise, she quickly picked up the game and repeatedly bested him. "I hope you don't actually gamble, you'd likely lose," Marilee commented. "I'm just letting you win," Billy claimed, not quite convincingly. He then explained how to play 7-card stud. Marilee quickly understood the game, observing the similarities with the previous one. "So, if I don't like my hand, I just fold, right?" Marilee clarified. "Yes, but you have to ante up to get cards, so you'll lose your initial bet," Billy explained. Once again, Marilee excelled, leaving Billy defeated in several rounds. They played using pebbles as tokens, given their abundance around the area. "If you ever decide to gamble, only wager what you can afford to lose," Marilee advised him, collecting her small pile of pebbles. That evening, she showed him extra tenderness. Their intimate moment was brief, but Billy felt comforted by her cuddling with him afterward. "I love you," he whispered. "It's nice to hear that, dear Billy," she responded, softly touching his cheek. Marilee woke up early the next morning, made breakfast, shared a kiss with Billy, and wished him a good day. She then spent some time grooming her long brown hair, put on a nice dress, and made her way to the outer office. "Good morning, dear father," she cheerfully greeted Daniel as he opened the front door. "Good. What, you're working as my assistant again?" Daniel asked, delighted. "Yes, as a way to contribute for my apartment," she explained. "The apartment is yours, no need to pay," he insisted, holding her hands gently. "I know, but I want to do this," she insisted, and gave him a peck on the lips. She smiled brightly at him before heading to her desk. Daniel, busy in his office, paused when he realized she had called him Daniel instead of the usual father. He pondered the change briefly but soon got caught up in his work. When the day ended, Daniel received another gentle kiss before he locked up and left. Marilee then returned to her apartment upstairs. She prepared dinner and waited. By 8 o'clock, Billy hadn't arrived, so she ate the now cold meal alone. At 9, she got ready for bed. At 11, a very intoxicated Billy came home. His slurred words were hard to understand, but gradually Marilee figured out that he had lost nearly $70 gambling at the Golden Nugget Saloon. "You were gambling while I waited with dinner," Marilee exclaimed in dismay. In his drunken state, fueled by frustration at himself and the night's events, Billy lashed out at her, an easier target for his misplaced anger. "You," Marilee stammered, clearly shocked. Then she couldn't hold back her tears. Seeing her cry, any fleeting feeling of justification Billy might have had faded away. The following morning, Marilee greeted Daniel with a gentle kiss. Later, while he was tidying his office, she approached him with a question. "You already asked one," he joked lightly. She smiled softly at his humor. "Please, sit down," Daniel suggested, moving his chair closer. "I'm not a child, Daniel," Marilee softly reminded him. "No, indeed you are not," he acknowledged. "Daniel, in your marriage, would you ever?" Marilee hesitated, her question about domestic violence hanging in the air. Daniel reflected on his own experiences, sharing how Annette's careless remarks and lavish spending sometimes frustrated him. "But no, Marilee, even in the most trying times, I never resorted to violence," Daniel confessed solemnly. "Violence is a sign of weakness." "Thank you, Daniel," Marilee responded softly. She then gave him a slightly longer and more affectionate kiss. As she leaned in, her dress shifted slightly. When she pulled away, Daniel couldn't help but notice her appearance briefly. Marilee playfully tousled his hair and chuckled when he lightly tapped her in a friendly manner. Later, 2 men brought in a third who had fallen and broken his leg. The sounds of the injured man's pain brought Marilee to tears. Even the patient, amidst his pain, noticed her distress. "You seem more upset than me," he joked weakly. Daniel carefully treated the man, wrapping the leg and applying a plaster cast, all the while reassuring everyone with his calm demeanor. Observing the plaster of Paris, Daniel's thoughts briefly wandered to Nguyen Mu, who was likely on her way to New York City and perhaps even to a steamer heading to Paris, France. "Return in about 6 weeks for a checkup," Daniel instructed the patient. Marilee noted the patient's details and informed him of the charge for the service. "Goodness," the man exclaimed. "At least when a horse breaks its leg, it's put out of its misery." "Bullets are an additional charge, Mr. Tisdale," Marilee replied, her expression unchanging. "Charlie, stop being stingy and pay up," one of his friends chided. "And you still have an outstanding charge for a tooth extraction back in May," Marilee added, flipping through the ledger. "You might as well pay now before she finds more charges," joked the other friend. "Mr. Porter, since you're here, would you like to settle your bill too?" Marilee asked pleasantly. "Charlie, you're making me consider breaking my other leg," John Porter joked as he paid his bill. "I don't think we've met before," the third man quickly said to Marilee. "No, I don't believe we have, Mr. Michaels," Marilee concurred. After collecting the payments, Marilee secured the money in a sturdy iron box and locked it. She closed the desk drawer with a loud bang and then attended to a young Mexican girl who entered the office, using her improving Spanish to understand that the girl was suffering from a painful wisdom tooth. Suddenly, Billy burst into the office, demanding money from Marilee. I had $70, but unfortunately, my husband gambled it away, Marilee responded, her tone turning cold. Do you have any money or not? Billy pressed. No, Marilee replied curtly. What? Doesn't Dr. Daniel pay you for your work here? Billy raised his voice in frustration. He pays me, and we have a place to live, Billy, remember. Marilee retorted. Please, lower your voice, this is a workplace. How much do you need, Billy? Daniel inquired softly. Maybe $5 or $10. Billy responded, hopeful. I can spare $2. Try to manage with that, Daniel offered, handing Billy 2 coins. Once Billy left, Marilee withdrew $2 coins from her purse. After the Mexican girl departed, she went into Daniel's office and handed him the 2 coins. Billy needs to learn to manage our finances, she said firmly. And Daniel, please don't do that again. He must learn. Daniel looked at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes, and pocketed the coins. Really, Marilee? He said with a smile. Telling me what to do? Yes, she laughed, playfully tapping his chest. Be careful, or I might start giving more orders. As evening approached, Daniel wished her a good night. Marilee gave him a peck on the cheek before heading upstairs to her apartment. That night, she prepared her own dinner, reheating leftovers. Billy would have to either make his own meal or apologize if he wanted her to warm up something for him. At 8:30 p.m., Marilee set aside her Bible and began getting ready for bed, turning down the lamp as she did so. Close to 11 p.m., Billy came into the bedroom, not alone. 2 men, one on each side of him, stood grinning as Marilee, startled, pulled the sheets up around her. The evening was unusually warm, and Marilee, deciding to forgo her usual nightwear, was taken aback by their appearance. Marilee, Billy slurred, struggling to stand straight. I've lost again. Get out, all of you, leave immediately. Marilee yelled at the 3 men. The men chuckled at her distress, but Marilee was adamant. You have no right to be here. Leave at once. Billy, looking distressed and confused, mumbled something incoherent. Marilee was outraged, unable to believe what was happening. One of the men made a crude comment as he stepped forward, but Marilee fiercely resisted. Do you not understand? Leave now, she demanded, her voice filled with anger and defiance. As the men continued to loom over her, Marilee felt a rush of fear and disgust. She tried to shield herself with the sheets, her voice echoing with indignation and disbelief at the situation. Finally, the men, realizing that she wasn't going to give in, reluctantly left the room, leaving Marilee shaken but resolute in her dignity. After the men had gone, Marilee sat in her bed, trying to process the frightening and humiliating encounter. She was left feeling violated and angry, her sense of safety shattered by the intrusion. The man finished quickly and left the room with a parting remark about his mother. He paused at the door, tauntingly inviting Billy to return for more gambling losses. After he left, Marilee confronted Billy with intense anger. You're a coward, she hissed at him, her voice filled with disdain. Billy, overwhelmed by shame, reacted physically in his trousers, further sickening Marilee. Your actions are revolting, she said coldly, witnessing his disgrace. In a burst of fury, Marilee lashed out at Billy with a kick, causing him to collapse on the kitchen floor in pain. She then retreated to the bedroom, locking the door firmly behind her. The next morning, Marilee found Billy asleep on the couch. She threw cold water on his face to wake him. Startled, Billy sputtered, What? Why? I'm leaving for Crescent City, Marilee declared firmly. You should return to the Benhurst Ranch. Her tone was unyielding. Gathering her belongings, she took a final, contemptuous look at Billy. Goodbye, Mr. William Jacob Benhurst III, she said scornfully before leaving. When Daniel arrived at the office, Marilee couldn't hold back her tears any longer. Upon learning of her harrowing night, Daniel immediately offered to take her away to Crescent City. Marilee, with her bags already packed, was ready to leave her painful past behind. Dear father, I always knew where I would go, she confessed. In the mayor's office, Will noticed his son Billy's worn-out appearance. Billy looked around, ensuring they were alone, and then sighed deeply. Get to the point, I'm not here to play games, Will said sharply. Billy gave a brief account, admitting to losing $89 over 2 nights. Will's expression darkened with anger. So, about that $20 advance I gave you yesterday? He asked sternly. I had a 10, a knave, and a king of spades, just needed the queen and ace, Billy tried to explain. And what did Marilee say about all this? Will inquired. She said I should go back to the Benhurst Ranch, Billy replied quietly. What if I say you can't come back to the ranch? Will said, his tone hard. Maybe it's time you grew up a bit. Then where do I go? Billy asked, confused. Polly McCall runs a boarding house on Clare Street, Will suggested. He called for Pepe, a local youth, and instructed him to check on a room at Polly's, sliding a few coins across the desk for payment. Pepe, go down to Polly's and inquire about a room for a month, Will instructed. Yes, Mr. Mayor, Pepe replied and hurried off. And stay away from the Golden Nugget, Will warned Billy. Will stood up, and Billy looked up questioningly. Where are you going? Billy asked. Away from here, Will replied curtly. Before leaving, Will checked that his Colt .45 was in its holster. He often kept it in his desk drawer. Giving his son one last look, he expressed his disappointment. "I'm tired of seeing you like this," he said bluntly. "All those books and classes didn't teach you much, did they?" Pepe caught up with Will and informed him that Polly had agreed to rent a room to Billy. Polly, a rather stout woman, hadn't mentioned to Pepe that the room was right next to hers. "All right, now find your cousin," Will instructed, handing Pepe some coins. "Both of you go to Dr. Jordanair's place and collect Billy's belongings, okay?" "Yes, Mr. Mayor," Pepe responded before hurrying off. Will shook his head, amused. "That boy's antics are exhausting to even think about," he said to himself. Later that evening, Beulah warmly welcomed Marilee with a hug. She invited Marilee to her kitchen for a chat about marriage, laughing sympathetically as Marilee shared her disappointing experiences. "Men always seem to rush through everything, especially that," Beulah said with a knowing laugh. During dinner, Daniel found himself captivated by Marilee's beauty. She noticed his gaze and smiled at him, their fingers briefly touching across the table before they continued with their meal. After dinner, outside their bedrooms, Marilee stood on her toes while Daniel embraced her gently. They shared a long, tender kiss before parting. "Sleep well, Marilee," Daniel said softly. "Good night, dear Daniel," Marilee whispered back. After a brief touch to his face, Marilee entered her room, and Daniel lingered until her door closed. Then he headed back downstairs. Meanwhile, at the Golden Nugget, Clem and Sam were busy winning money from unsuspecting players. A new player, appearing intoxicated, joined the table and began to bet. After a series of raises and card exchanges, the newcomer revealed his hand, 2 pairs. "Thought you had me there," Sam commented cheerfully, showing his full house. "The same hand you had in the last game," observed Dr. Jordanair, his speech clear and not showing any signs of drunkenness. "What?" Clem exclaimed in surprise. "In Clem, you had the 3 nines you're showing now," Dr. Jordanair pointed out. Clem glanced at Sam, unsure. Sam's expression turned stern as he faced Daniel. "What are you implying, friend?" Sam asked, his hand inching towards his pistol. Clem looked between Sam and the new player, visibly tense. "I'm simply saying, may God have mercy on your souls," Daniel stated calmly. In a quick succession of events, Daniel's first shot struck Sam, and his second hit Clem. Daniel then collected only his own coins from the table. He left the saloon undisturbed, mounted his horse, and rode back to Crescent City. The next morning, Beulah and Marilee tried their hand at making huevos rancheros, similar to those served at the Main Street Saloon. Daniel preferred the saloon's version but complimented their effort, enjoying the breakfast in Crescent City. Later, he and Marilee headed back to Benhurst for work. Their third patient of the day shared news about the previous night's incident involving Sam and Clem, having witnessed everything. "Did you really do that for me?" Marilee questioned Daniel, entering his office urgently. "Good heavens, woman!" Dr. Jordanair exclaimed, startled. "You nearly made me make a mistake." "Is it true?" Marilee persisted. "How could I have done it?" Daniel replied. "You saw me retire to my room. Unless the incident happened there, how could I be involved?" Back at her desk, Marilee fought back tears, realizing Daniel had taken a stand that her husband failed to. Instead of reacting with indifference to her plight, Daniel had acted, unlike her husband who seemed more concerned about himself than her well-being. The patient finished up and came to pay Marilee. Daniel walked into the outer office, his face stern and serious. "Now, if I'm with a patient, don't come in unless I call you," Daniel said firmly to Marilee. In response, Marilee playfully pulled Daniel down by his tie and kissed him, much to the amusement of the men in the waiting room. Can't wait to see Billy's reaction to this," one man joked. "Go ahead and tell him," Marilee replied, her cheeks flushed with a smile. The following day, Marilee was relieved to find she wasn't pregnant, a concern given her recent encounters. She took care of herself with some cotton gauze and tried to maintain a positive demeanor as she and Beulah prepared breakfast. Meanwhile, William J. Benhurst, Jr., contemplated whether to send for Billy or enjoy a quiet morning. The household was still unsettled by Marilee's departure and her assertiveness under their roof. He hadn't even mentioned to Norma that Billy and Marilee were living separately. Billy eventually showed up late that morning, having overslept at Polly's. His time with Polly had been educational for him, as she guided him on being more attentive and skillful. Polly promised more lessons after dinner, sending Billy off with a passionate kiss. Later, Will asked Billy about Sam and Clem. "Yeah, I know them," Billy replied nervously. Will explained how they had cheated the wrong person in a card game the previous night, pointing out the suspicious consistency in Sam's winning hands. "So, did the sheriff take them in?" Billy inquired, his thoughts drifting. He hoped to recover his lost money but also felt a sense of fear. He knew that if Sam and Clem could cheat at cards, they might resort to other dishonest means. The fact that they had been involved with Marilee, even with his misguided consent, troubled him deeply. As Billy dwelled on these thoughts, Will broke his reverie. "No, it was the undertaker who had to deal with them," Will stated. Will stood up, looking at Billy with clear disapproval. He checked his holster, his actions reflecting his disappointment. "Looks like Dr. Jordanair took the action you should have, instead of losing your dignity to gambling," Will said sharply. Billy felt a rush of anger at his father's harsh words. Meanwhile, Marilee was focused on balancing the ledger for the month's end. She had received a bank statement from Mr. Robertson, the bank manager, detailing the deposits made by Dr. Jordanair while she was at the Benhurst Ranch. Is everything adding up? Daniel asked, noticing Marilee's concentrated expression. Be careful, or a bird might fly off with that tongue sticking out. Marilee paused and then gestured for Daniel to join her in the inner office. On our wedding night, Billy mentioned something. Daniel, have you ever heard of a French kiss? Marilee inquired. Yes, I'm familiar with it, Daniel replied, recalling his past marriage with Annette. Have you ever? Marilee hesitated, her curiosity evident. Daniel responded affirmatively, recalling his experiences during his marriage. Sensing her curiosity, Daniel playfully pulled her onto his lap, causing her to squeal in surprise. As he leaned in, his mustache brushed against her lips, and she gasped as he initiated the kiss she had inquired about. Daniel's approach to kissing was a stark contrast to Billy's. It was smooth and filled with emotion, a blend of ardor and a hint of something deeper. When Daniel finally broke away from the kiss, Marilee was left breathless. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you, Daniel confessed softly. Marilee caressed his face gently, her eyes locked with his. She then kissed him once more, a soft whisper escaping her lips about wishing for such moments before her marriage to Billy. Their moment was interrupted by a voice from the outer office. Hello, is the doc here? I've been shot. Startled, Marilee quickly got off Daniel's lap. What happened? How did you get shot? Daniel asked as he hurried to assist the injured man. I was practicing my trick shot, the man said, slightly embarrassed. Maybe next time, practice without real bullets, Daniel suggested, assessing the man's injury. The man chuckled ruefully at the advice. After the patient left, Marilee finalized the ledger, pleased with her work. However, before she and Daniel could share another moment, a new patient arrived, reluctant to disclose his issue until he spoke to Daniel. That night, outside Daniel's room, Marilee stood on her toes for another kiss, their embrace warm and close. Eventually, she reluctantly retreated to her own room, her thoughts filled with Daniel. In her dreams, she pondered different aspects of relationships, contrasting her experiences with Billy, Clem, and Sam. When her monthly cycle was over, she found herself outside Daniel's room once again, kissing him with eagerness, before stepping back to look into his eyes. Daniel, I don't want to be alone tonight, Marilee expressed. Your bed has plenty of room for both of us. With those words, she entered his private quarters. The room reflected Daniel's character, straightforward and no nonsense. It contained a bed, a table with a wash basin, an armoire, a small chair, and a bookcase filled with medical books. The glow of an oil lamp created a cozy atmosphere. Marilee, are you sure about this? Daniel hesitated as she began to undress. However, his reservations faded as he helped her with her gown, placing it carefully on the chair. Then, embracing her, Daniel kissed her passionately. As Daniel undressed, Marilee paused him several times with her kisses and gentle caresses. Daniel, you're wonderful, Marilee said with a hint of awe, observing him. His physique wasn't as imposing as Sam's, but it was more than she had known with Billy. She noticed his features with an innocent curiosity, her gaze lingering on his form. Their embrace was warm and close, skin against skin, as they connected deeply. Gently, Daniel guided her to his bed. He tenderly kissed her lips, her neck, and her shoulders, eliciting soft sounds of contentment from Marilee. Her response grew as he attentively kissed her, showing affection not just for her lips but for her entire being. Marilee discovered new sensations, feeling a warmth and connection she hadn't known before. Daniel, you're so kind, she sighed, feeling cherished and respected in his presence. Marilee's eyes widened in surprise as Daniel tenderly explored her with both care and curiosity. She gasped and then let out a joyful squeal as he focused on her sensitively, making her feel cherished and adored. As Daniel moved to position himself above her, Marilee felt an overwhelming sense of connection and intimacy. Their embrace deepened, and she found herself expressing her love for him in the heat of the moment. Afterwards, Daniel gently guided Marilee, showing her how to reciprocate the affection and pleasure. She discovered new aspects of their intimacy, exploring with curiosity and tenderness. Exhausted, they both rested, with Marilee finding comfort in Daniel's arms. A perfect pillow, she murmured contentedly as she snuggled close to him. Months later, after moving to Crescent City, Marilee approached Daniel with concerns about feeling unwell. After examining her and discussing her symptoms, Daniel shared a heartwarming smile and a gentle kiss. Marilee, I believe you might be pregnant, he announced. Back in Benhurst, after getting their office ready, Daniel stopped at the telegraph office to send a message to his father-in-law in New Orleans. The Crescent City, a memorable place, the telegraph operator remarked nostalgically. Shortly after, a young boy delivered a telegram to the office. It informed Daniel that there had been no news of Annette or her child since he had left them with her father. Daniel tucked the telegram away in his desk, a chapter of his past now closed, as he focused on the new life he was building with Marilee. Daniel made another visit to the telegraph office, this time to send a message to a law office in New Orleans, Louisiana. I need to initiate divorce proceedings immediately, he instructed, and the operator swiftly sent the dispatch. Upon leaving the office, he was greeted by Marilee, who had brought their horses and was waiting patiently. "You could have just gone ahead," he started. "I preferred to wait," she replied simply. The law firm in New Orleans agreed to take on Daniel's divorce case. Although not commonplace, such requests were not unheard of, particularly in cases involving infidelity. Daniel sent the necessary funds for the retainer and anticipated court costs. "What's this for?" Marilee inquired. "It's for a divorce, so I can marry the mother of my child," Daniel explained. Marilee was taken aback. "Oh, and I'm still married too," she realized. Meanwhile, Polly was breaking the news to Billy that they had no future together. "I've found a new lodger," she mentioned, dressing herself. "But I love you," Billy protested. Polly gently touched his cheek. "I thought I did too, until I saw what the new lodger has to offer," she said candidly. She advised Billy to return to his wife, suggesting that she might have forgiven him by now. After a kiss goodbye, Polly left the room. "Maybe you can show her what I've taught you," she called back to him. Billy left the boarding house and headed to the Main Street saloon. There, Marissa's company, along with some drinks, lifted his spirits. Emboldened by alcohol and the lessons from Polly, Billy decided to put them into practice with Marissa. "Aw, Billy, you're quite something," she giggled after their time together. Meanwhile, a lawyer in Denver agreed to help Marilee divorce William J. Benhurst III. The $20 retainer fee initially shocked Marilee, but Daniel, ever supportive, paid it without hesitation. Billy, upon receiving the divorce papers, was determined to contest the separation. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Marilee so soon after their marriage. In a fit of anger, he confronted her at Dr. Jordanair's office. "You can't divorce me, I love you," Billy asserted, barging in. "There will be a divorce," Marilee responded firmly, standing up. She subtly indicated her slightly swollen belly. "I'm pregnant, Billy, and you know very well the child isn't yours," she stated bluntly. As Billy and others in the office looked on in shock, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I want to marry the father of my child, and for that, I need to be divorced from you," Marilee explained, gently patting Daniel's hand. Billy, feeling betrayed, lashed out at Daniel and stormed out of the office. Marilee, remaining calm, signaled to the next patient that it was their turn. Later, Daniel bought a buggy and made it comfortable for Marilee with a soft, down-filled pillow on the seat. She protested initially, insisting she could still ride her horse, Missy. Daniel reminded her of a recent incident with a snake, gently rubbing her belly in a protective gesture. "All right, as you wish," Marilee conceded, settling onto the pillow in the buggy. Together, they rode towards Crescent City, with Daniel guiding the horses and Marilee contentedly by his side. Halfway to Crescent City from the town of Benhurst, Daniel halted the horses. In the path stood Billy Benhurst, gripping a 10-gauge shotgun. "You think you can just take someone else's partner?" Billy accused, his words slurred from drinking. Daniel's hand hovered near his pocket, but he didn't dare move. Any sudden action might provoke Billy to shoot. The risk was too high, especially with Marilee and their unborn child nearby, not to mention the horses that could bolt. Raising his hands to show he meant no harm, Daniel tried to calm the situation. But Billy only scoffed. Marilee, beside Daniel, rolled her eyes at her husband's drunken state. This was the same man who had once, in a similar drunken episode, handed her over to two strangers. "Look, Billy, whatever you think this is going to solve," Daniel began, trying to keep his voice steady. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. Billy looked shocked, then collapsed. Marilee was holding a smoking Derringer. Daniel quickly went to Billy, who now had a bloody shoulder wound. "I was aiming for his head," Marilee muttered, fumbling to reload. "Marilee, stop. He's hurt," Daniel said, lifting Billy into the wagon. Billy moaned, "You could have ended me." "That was the plan," Marilee retorted. Daniel treated Billy's wound and sent him on his way. He and Marilee then continued their journey home. The next day, Will and Billy visited Dr. Jordanair's office. "Why did you shoot my son? He won't agree to a divorce," Will confronted Marilee. Marilee explained the true events, with Daniel confirming her honesty. "He won't challenge the divorce," Will assured. Turning to Billy, he added, "Go home. Your mother needs you more than this town needs a deputy mayor like you." My comment: do you think OP got the ending he wanted? Comment down below, let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next one.